We are currently $28 trillion in debt. Whose fault is it? Republicans, Democrats? The answer is yes. Yes on both fronts. Both parties are responsible for the debt. Now, one side is honest about it. One side will tell you they don't give a fig about the debt. The debt be damned. We're for new monetary theory. Spend as much as you've got, borrow as much as you can, and somehow we're going to combat the influence of China by borrowing more money from China. So what we end up with is a $28 trillion debt. We actually borrow more in a month than we used to borrow in a year. And we say we're going to combat China through this bill, but we're going to combat China by increasing a department of government, the National Science Foundation, that is actually probably one of the most wasteful agencies in government. If you want to study cocaine, and you want to study Japanese quail using cocaine, and you want to know if they're more sexually promiscuous, do you know how you get approval for your funding? You call up your other buddies that study cocaine in animals, and you say, hey, I've got this great new study, so how do we get, $500,000 spent studying Panamanian frogs? We have to review this. This is an academic point. We've now discovered that the NIH was funding the Wuhan lab. So we should have oversight on what happens. But after 50 years of abuse at the National Science Foundation, we're still studying, will people eat ants to combat climate change? Seriously, that was a study. How many ants will people eat? And how many ants do you have to eat to reduce the global warming by 1 degree? It's a lot of ants. But the thing is that's the kind of studies that we're having coming out of here, and we don't make it any better by increasing their budget. If you are a wasteful agency and we give you more money, we'll get more waste. The NIH has got some of the same problems. One of the ones from the NIH in recent years was $2 million to see if someone in the buffet line, when you're going through the buffet or Luby's cafeteria, and someone in front of you sneezes on the food, are you more or less likely to eat the food? $2 million. Now look, if you want to come to me and say we should study Alzheimer's disease, I've got open ears. But if you want to study whether somebody sneezing on the food makes you more or less likely to eat the food, that's just ridiculous. The American people know it's ridiculous. If the American people could see what we're voting on and saying, oh, we're going to combat China by giving more money to the most wasteful agency in the world. And where's the money coming from? Is it out of a surplus? Can we go over to the Federal Reserve and open this big safe? There's a big cache of money. Is there a rainy day fund? Is there a savings account that we can tap into to say we're going to have government-funded research to combat China? Well, no, we have to borrow the money from China. Think of the irony. We borrow the money from China to put it into technology. We complain about Chinese socialism, which is the government running everything and spending all the money. And so what are we going to do? The same thing. We're going to borrow the money from China, and then we're going to have government-directed research that we all say, oh, socialism is the government directing this. Then we're going to do the same thing, and we're going to be stronger than China. There was $700,000 allotted from the National Science Foundation for autism. Look, I know parents who have kids with autism. I can be convinced that the federal government can be involved in some way. But the $700,000 that was allotted for autism was then taken and subcontracted to a bunch of eggheads who wanted to listen to a tape of Neil Armstrong on the moon. So if you're as old as me, you can remember being in school and seeing the crackly black and white pictures coming back from the moon and hearing Neil Armstrong say, one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind. Or did he say, one small step for a man? So a group of researchers, and I use the term loosely, at the National Science Foundation got $700,000 of autism money to study one word, the preposition a. Did Neil Armstrong use the letter A or the word A, or did he not? This is lizards on the treadmill. No, it was shrimp on a treadmill, I think. But they've got lizards on treadmill, they've got shrimp, they've got crawfish on treadmill. But think about it, really. We are a big, proud country, but we are $1 trillion in debt before we get to all the extra stuff. Before we get to all the COVID bailouts, we're $1 trillion in debt just from the institutional expenses of the country. So we bring in about $3 trillion in revenue, and we spend about $4 trillion. So of the expenses that we have, most of the money is consumed by Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security, food stamps, and the military, and then a variety of welfare programs. But that consumes $1 trillion more than comes in. So we've been meeting over the last year and just spending extra money beyond the $1 trillion deficit. So we have $1 trillion deficit just from our ordinary expenses, and then we add to that, you know, a couple trillion here for COVID last year, a couple trillion more. We're going to do a couple trillion more for free college, free daycare, free this, free that. But it's not free. There's no such thing as a free lunch. There is nothing in this world that you will get for free. You will either have the future paying for it.
Order in the chamber.
You will either have the future paying for it, our kids and our grandkids paying for it, or you will pay for it through inflation, or you pay for it through default. And you can default in a dramatic way through the destruction of a currency, or you can default in a gradual way through price inflation. But I don't think this bill makes us stronger. In fact, I think the Chinese sit back and, you know, hold their hand up and sort of titter and laugh at America, thinking they're going to be stronger by borrowing more money from China. So I just don't think it makes us any stronger at all. I think it makes us weaker. And it would be one thing if it weren't being so horribly wasted. Lizards on a treadmill. So they get the lizard on a treadmill, and then they have active x-rays to look at its joints. They were curious as to why a lizard waddles. So have you ever seen a lizard or an iguana? They walk funny, they waddle. So why do they waddle? You know, what do their joints look like in x-rays? And so we spent, you know, $1.5 million studying lizards on a treadmill. It kind of is reminiscent going back to the Wuhan lab. People say, and this is what Dr. Fauci's been saying, Dr. Fauci says, well, who wouldn't want to study the SARS virus? Well, yeah, we should. But then again, why would we pay the Chinese to do it? Well, there's all these viruses in China. Well, are the Chinese destitute? I think we're here because the Chinese are kicking our butt in trade, and everybody's worried about China, so we're going to do all this stuff to combat China, and yet we send money to a Chinese lab. Now, we've recently voted to change that, but it's been going on for decades. In fact, Dr. Fauci in committee the other day said he still trusts the Chinese scientists. Seems oblivious to the fact that perhaps there's a military influence in these labs, and perhaps the scientists don't do anything without permission of the Chinese military. Perhaps that there was a militarization of the virus going on, oblivious to that. But I'm not so sure, you know, why we would borrow money from China to send kids in Pakistan to space camp in Alabama or to Dollywood. You know, $250,000. We also spent over $1 million in Afghanistan doing an anti-drug program. Unfortunately, really, the drugs problems in our country, they grow it like corn. It's a crop for them. The problem is the demand comes from us. We spent $1 million on a public relations television programming in Afghanistan, and it was to convince the Afghanis not to use drugs. It was in English. You know, what are we doing? We're borrowing money from China to build roads in Afghanistan. One of the things they did in Afghanistan years ago is they were going to build a natural gas station. This was to reduce the footprint of Afghanistan, the carbon footprint. So this is the absurdities we sometimes go to with climate change. This is a country that cooks their food on open fires often. This is a country with an average income of about $800. Most people do not have a car. So what did we decide to do for Afghanistan to reduce their carbon footprint? We decided to build a natural gas station. So the natural gas station was built. It was supposed to cost $800,000, but you know, sometimes government's not that efficient, so they had a few cost overruns, 83, and it ended up costing $45 million. But it's a boneheaded, idiotic idea to build a gas station for natural gas vehicles in Afghanistan. They don't have cars, much less cars that run on natural gas. But we did it. We spent $45 million in Afghanistan on it. So my staff was over there looking at the waste, and they said to the military, can we go see the famous natural gas station? And as they wanted to go see it, the Marines said, well, it would take two helicopters full of 30 Marines in each helicopter to take you to the gas station. So we were told it was too dangerous, and we didn't want to insist on something that was that dangerous. So we spent $45 million on a gas station that we can't visit because it's too dangerous to serve up natural gas that nobody has a car that runs on natural gas. And my imagination goes to the gas station. All I can imagine is sort of copper tubing sticking out of the ground, people running off with copper tubing. The list goes on and on and on. The frustration of the American people is, why does it never change? William Proxmire was talking about this in 1972, studying why people fall in love. Why do people date? Governments doing dating apps, studying why people are happy or unhappy, studying whether or not if you take a selfie of yourself smiling and look at it later in the day, whether or not that'll make you happy. Seriously, 500,000 here, 1 million there. Is there anything in this bill that will stop that from happening? So it's been happening for 50 years. You know, we didn't even authorize these things. They just go on and on. There's no oversight. You ask any questions, nobody wants to give you any answers, and it goes on and on. But I guarantee if you put up the different waste things that are going on in our government, and you said that this is the agency that's studying the mating call of the Panamanian frog. These are the agencies studying whether someone sneezes on your food. Do you think the American people would be with you? They're only with you because they don't know what you're doing today. They don't know that you're wasting more money, that you're shoveling good money after bad. They don't know that this is more of the same, that this has been going on for 50 years, and nobody, Republican or Democrat, is fixing the problem. We're just shoveling more money out the door. We're destroying our country. We're destroying our currency. Right now, it's a little bit at a time. It's coming through inflation, but inflation's out there. It's lurking. People are talking about it. But there's also another way you can destroy your country. If you look at the 20th century and you look at the decline in the stock market, most of it's in like 7 days. So those who think that we couldn't have a precipitous correction, that there couldn't be a precipitous correction where all of a sudden everybody wakes up in the marketplace and says, oh my goodness, the emperor has no clothes. We're $28 trillion in debt, and we have companies that have, 200 to 1 price to earnings ratio. We have companies that are worth hundreds and hundreds of dollars, thousands of dollars. And yet, what is their profit? Some of them don't make profit. Is there going to be a day where people wake up and say, oh my goodness, the stock market, the emperor has no clothes, and there's a massive sell-off? I don't know. But I do worry that the stock market is grossly inflated. I do worry when we pass out $1,400 checks, which we did not have. We give them to everybody. And what do the young people do with their checks? Buying GameStop. So GameStop goes through the roof, makes no profit. It's a dying company. And it goes through the roof because everybody gets giddy on it because everybody's got all this free money. There is no free money. Ultimately, the $1,400 we gave to people will be lost as wages don't keep up with inflation. People, I call it the big heart, small brain syndrome of Washington. Everybody wants to help somebody. We have the same compassion. We want to help those out of work. But if you give people too much not to work, then they won't work. If people don't work for a long period of time, they won't be hired again. This was illustrated when we extended unemployment to 99 weeks. Anybody who stayed out of work 99 weeks and came in looking for a job, if there was another worker that had been out of work less, guess who got hired? Every study showed this. So if an employer is faced with 2 employees, one's been out of work 10 weeks and one's been out of work 99 weeks, guess who gets hired? The one's been out of work 10 weeks. And so when you institutionalize unemployment, when you pay people more from the government not to work than to work, you get a permanent class of unemployed. And there comes a point at which they are not employable. Now, what does that do to a people? What does that do to a person? See, I think our self-esteem is tied up in what we do for a living. Your self-esteem comes from being proud of your work, but it comes from work. You cannot get self-esteem without work, and you can't be given self-esteem. Now, we've decided that, I don't know why they even think they need this anymore, because I think climate alarmism has really penetrated all of our education. But just in case there's a child in the country that's not afraid that the oceans will rise and cover the land and that we're all going to drown and that the polar bears are going to drown, we need to make sure they know it through a special video game. So we spent $500,000 on a video app to try to convince our kids that the polar bears are drowning sometime soon and that the end of the
order in the
world is
chamber.
around the corner.